Hi everyone, thanks for taking the time to check out InteractionKit. I'm going to give you guys a quick walkthrough on how to set up an InteractionKit system within a FPS style game. And I'm going to have a quick look at the different editors, what they do, how it works, and let's just jump straight in. So the first thing I want to show you guys is we're working with a really simple scene here. It is a first person kind of walk around kind of environment, but I can't jump or anything like that. It's just super simple just to illustrate, you know, the system and what it can do. So this is what we're working with. We've got a little scene with some various sort of grey walls and such, and we have a yellow cube, and that yellow cube is what we're going to work on today. We're going to make it so that we can interact with this cube and dynamically change its color. Randomly change its color, in fact. So let's see how we can do that with InteractionKit. Okay, so we're going to go to Game Object, InteractionKit, and choose the Create InteractionKit System. And here it creates the core object for us. Inside its child objects, you can see it has a UI canvas as well as an event system, and you can remove the event system if you already have one in your scene, but we're going to keep ours. So it's split up into two components. The core component, which runs the system, basically all the technical stuff, and then we have the GUI component that runs just the GUI. The cool thing is, if you're an advanced user, you can actually completely build your own GUI on top of the system using the API, because it's totally modular, but we're going to stick with this for now. The other cool thing to mention is that literally everything in InteractionKit has really cool, easy to use visual editors, and that's going to come in handy as we start working with this, and it makes things much easier to understand. Okay, so let's start with quickly setting up the InteractionKit system here. So the first thing it wants to know is, how are we supposed to detect interactions around us? Now, InteractionKit is a cool system that can basically handle any kind of game, practically any kind of game. At least I haven't found one that it can't handle yet. So I'll say, for the purpose of covering myself, I'll say it will handle most types of games. So we're gonna go with camera raycast 3D. So essentially what we're saying is the technique or algorithm we're going to use to detect interactions, in this case for this kind of game, is raycast 3D from the camera. So we're going to shoot a raycast from the camera. If it hits an interaction, then it's all cool. InteractionKit's going to sort it out for us and figure out what it needs to do. So that's cool. So we have some options, and we can, you know, change where the raycast starts by giving it a little offset, or defining how, you know, the furthest away we can shoot the raycast, so you can tweak that for your own games. And the only reference we need to set up right now is the camera. So the camera is called main camera, and it will find it automatically at runtime. And it's cool that it's a string rather than a direct reference, because you can load in InteractionKit dynamically, and it will find the references within the game without you having to set it up directly. So it actually helps you if you're trying to build it in a kind of dynamic loading kind of way. So that should be quite helpful. So before we can play the game, we need to set up our first interaction. And to do that, we're going to click on the interaction cube that we're going to use. And I have a little script on there. And all it does is it has a public function called onRandomizeColor. And whenever that function is called, the color of the cube will randomly change into a different color. It's a very simple example for this, just to give you guys an idea of how everything works. Now, so we want to make this cube interactive, and it's really easy to do in InteractionKit. We just go to Game Object, InteractionKit, make Game Object interactive, boom, and that's it, pretty much. So obviously we're gonna set it up a little bit more. There's a little bit more to it than that. The first thing is we have to tell it the activation distance. How close do we need to be for this interaction to sort of register with the InteractionKit system. 4 is generally a pretty good number. It tends to work quite well. The name of the interaction, I'm gonna go with colorize cube. And the type of interaction, I'll just sort of say use. It's typically should be like a verb or something. Strictly speaking, you don't literally have to kind of adhere to these kind of rules with how you name the name of the interaction or the type. You can kind of do what you want because the UI is quite customizable, and you know, you don't have to really stick to this convention. But it's there for the purpose of, you know, keeping things organized. Game icons are there for if you have another object in 3D or in 2D that you use to display an icon to the character, you can have that temporarily disabled while the interaction kit is showing the player an interaction. I'm going to show this more in some of the other videos, and we can also set an interaction icon. If we leave this blank, it's actually going to use the default one that is in the UI over here. So I'll explain this a little bit more in a bit. So for the meantime, we don't really need to change that. So the next thing is we need to set up an event. And events allow you to set up the actions that are going to run when this interaction is triggered. So we create our first event. We can make as many events as we want, and we can have conditions for each one if we wanted to make it quite complex. So you could have one set of actions happen if the player has progressed in a certain way, or have a different set of actions. You know, like for example, if you had a door, you could say if the player had a key, open the door. If not, show like a message to say go get the key first, kind of thing. So you can do lots of really cool abstractions with this. So for the meantime, we're going to keep things simple, and I'm going to just call this colorize cube because we're only going to have one event. There's going to be no conditions, and the conditions can be added visually here, which is actually really cool, and that's what allows you to build the complex stuff. But we're going to keep it simple and just have no conditions, which means this event will always run every time. The next thing we're going to do is set up the actions. Now, people who've used LDC are going to recognize this. It's going to be very familiar to you guys. But for those of you who haven't, you can set up loads of different kinds of actions. You can create game objects, you can activate objects, delete them, sort of destroy them, pardon me, deactivate them, destroy them, show messages in the console. But the one we're interested in right now is to send the messages to other game objects. Now what this does is it allows us to run external scripts. Now this is like very powerful. This is what's going to make us able to do practically anything with InteractionKit. So what we're going to say is we want this interaction, when it's triggered, to call this script. Remember the randomized color script? So we're going to drag this object into here, and we're going to tell it to run its colorize function. So if we go back to the script, that was the method name on randomize color, and we just replace that, and that's it. When this interaction is triggered, it's going to call that game object and tell it to run a script called it's going to tell it to run a function called on randomize color, and it will check all the scripts on that game object in order to run that function. The other cool thing just to note really quickly is that you don't actually have to directly reference these objects. You can enter the name of the object instead, and that's really kind of beneficial in situations where a game object doesn't exist yet. So you could say, let's say you're going to create a game object at a certain point in time, and therefore you could find that game object and then call the script at that point in time. The Unity built-in event system doesn't allow you to do that. So this is a plus that you have with this system right here. Okay, let's see what we have so far. So I'm going to press play. So now if I move up to the cube, you can see the UI is kind of massive, but we're going to fix that in a bit. But it is showing up. So if we go away, it kind of shows up. If we go in, it comes back. And you can see if we press the E key, the cube starts to colorize. It starts to change its own color. And I think I just made up my own word, but that's all good. So it is kind of working, but we want to change the scale of this UI. So what we can do is we can click on InteractionKit and head over to the GUI component. You can see that in the GUI we're using the move to interaction object 3D placement mode. We have the option of actually using the static placement mode, which is basically setting it up as a a fixed position button essentially, and that looks fine. But I think for this demo we'll go back to the 3D placement. I think that kind of looks pretty cool. What I'm doing now is basically overriding the UI scale. So I'm going to enter a smaller value here, and I think this is looking good. And yeah, there we go. Another cool option we've got right here is use dynamic scaling. And what this does is it basically scales the UI to make it appear like it's the same size no matter how close or far away we get to it. So if I was to turn it off, you can see that it grows, it zooms in and zooms out depending on your distance, because it literally is in 3D space. So if we turn it back on, you can see that it is still in 3D space, but it's actually dynamically being scaled in order to give the illusion that it's the same size, which I think works kind of better in most cases for UI. So we'll keep that. And we also have some extra options for controlling scaling. So you could just make it kind of just fade in and out instead, or you can even add rotations if we wanted to, but we'll keep it like that. And I've just realized that because we're in play mode, these settings aren't going to stick, so I'm going to quickly just copy that value, turn off play mode, and then just paste everything back in. Oops, there you go. So let's give this a quick test. And yep, UI looks pretty cool. Okay, moving on with the inspectors. We can talk a bit more about block detection raycasts. Now what this allows us to do is set up which objects will be blocking our raycasts to various objects. So you can see here the green line represents a valid interaction between the player and this yellow object. But if I go towards this wall over here, you can see that through the wall. This isn't good. We don't want that. We want to be able to block walls from allowing us to interact between things. So what we can do quite easily is I've already set up a layer called block interact, and I can just go into InteractionKit and say, you know what, all the objects with the block interact layer, no, I don't want it to work. So you can see what's happening here is we have a red line now. So the scene is telling us from a debugging perspective that there is an interaction there, but it's actually being blocked by layer obstacle 2, and it's in the console too, so it's spamming out a few messages for us there. Now if we don't like all these kind of messages and debugging options, we can actually turn them off. So we can turn off debug collisions, which will stop it appearing in the console. If we turn it back on, you can see that it's telling us which object it's interacting with, or sorry, colliding with. And we can turn off the raycast lines as well by checking this on and off. Logic and actions, we'll just leave that on for now, just to keep things a bit simple. We'll come back to the other options, but for now, you can see that the interactions are now not working when I'm in front of the wall, but if I come out of the wall's range view, we can now interact normally again. So literally setting up obstacles is this easy. You just basically tell it which layers you want it to be using as a kind of block, and it does the rest. The other cool thing is if I go over to this object over here, you can see that we're still able to create an interaction between this wall, and that's because I purposely didn't put the layer on this one, but instead we have a tag called block interact. So we can optionally choose to go over here, and then we can set up tags as well. So I can say also block game objects with the tag block, interact. And now these game objects are blocked too. So there's a red line there, that means interaction exists, but it's being blocked. If I go over here, it's cool. And if I go over here, also being blocked. So you can see you can have a mixed environment of tags and layers. Typically sticking to layers will be better for performance, but I know that in certain situations, like if you've created like a big project and you've already assigned layers to everything, doing it this way could be kind of tricky. And for ease of use, to keep things moving quickly, you could instead purely use tags. The performance shouldn't be too much different, but I think internally sticking with physics layers will give you a slight edge, but most likely it will be nothing to write home about. In most cases it probably wouldn't be very visible. So you got lots of room to be able to handle collisions in that way, so it's totally up to you guys how you want to do it. Yeah, you can add as many tags as you want by pressing the plus and minus buttons, and literally we've set up all the kinds of collisions, all the hardcore stuff we've done. This scene's good to go, and if the rest of the game kind of followed this kind of setup, you wouldn't really need to set anything up other than the individual interactions. Just to finish off the tabs, we can set up how you trigger interactions by either saying, you know what, if we press the button, so the InteractionKit UI also comes as a button. So this area here, if I click it, it also, you know, I don't have to press the hotkey, which is E. I can also click it too. If I remove that reference, you know, it will still work, but not with using the button. So you can remove button input by removing this reference. Trigger with key code, you can choose the different key codes. So loads of different things you can choose here, different joystick buttons, etc. Or you could do the input get button. So if you're familiar with the Unity API, the input stuff, you can add the button name there too. Trigger timeouts is basically a small delay between how many interactions you want the system to be able to trigger. Another way of thinking of it is every time an interaction is triggered, half a second needs to go by before another interaction will be allowed. So that's a kind of better way to understand it, I think. So you can change this. Typically half a second seems to work fine. System performance is an interesting section which allows you to make the trade-off between accuracy and performance. Generally speaking, it should be very optimized to begin with, but if you want to, you can, you know, start tweaking this and see how you go. Find new interaction objects basically allows you to see if there's any new interactive objects in the scene, and in InteractionKit will then update the internal system to say, oh look, there's more objects here. So every 5 seconds is typically okay. And update interaction distances is every third of a second at the moment. It will update to see if you can see an interaction. It's generally okay. You may want to make it a smaller number, say, so for example 0.2 or something. If you're doing an FPS and you want it to be super accurate, there'll be a tiny bit of a performance cost to that. You can play around with it to see if it's okay. Generally speaking, you shouldn't notice too much. It should typically work very well. And in the final tab, in the audio tab, we can set up a custom audio source if we want to. If we don't, one will be created dynamically by InteractionKit. Typically that's okay. And we can have different sound effects, volumes and pitches for when a new interaction is found, when it's lost, and when it is triggered. And you can easily change these by dragging different values into these boxes and fields. And yeah, generally speaking, I think we've covered most things. Just to quickly finish up with the GUI tabs, you can set up the way hotkeys are displayed. So if I go back into the game quickly, you can see that the hotkey E has a sort of squared bracket before and a squared bracket after it, so the prefix and the suffix. You could change this to anything really. So you can see as I do this stuff, it's a bit small. Let's open this up a bit. So yeah, you can type different stuff there and it will update. You could have it sell the key code is the bit that it's using. So if you go back into the options tab up here, remember we have key codes, UI buttons and input buttons, etc. So right now it's pulling the key code from here. So it's pulling E, so that is what's going to be displayed as the hotkey. But you can also choose to do the the input button, which would have been this field, or you can choose a custom string and just, you know, kind of write anything or update it yourself through the API. So whatever you want to do, you've got lots of control there. You have the default button for the interaction, so you can see right now we have the little hand thing, but you know, we could choose kind of, you choose anything really. Let's go back to the hand. So that's basically your default interactive icon. You can also tell it that specific interactions cannot override this icon by clicking that. And that basically means that this hand is always going to be used and all the other overrides will be ignored. But that's fine. And the references are basically the objects needed to control the UI. This is set up for you, so typically you don't need to do anything here. But yeah, that kind of covers the basics of the system, how to set things up, how it all works, and I hope you guys enjoyed checking out InteractionKit, and you can really see the promise and what it can do. I mean, we've only set up a cube in this scene, and in the other videos I'm going to show different kinds of games and how we can build up on the same kind of foundations to build some really complex, cool stuff. Thanks for watching everyone, and I hope you guys check out the other videos and the demos, and consider InteractionKit for your workflow. Cheers.